Former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki made some comments suggesting that your wife, the Second Lady, needed to be saved from you. How do you feel about comments like that being made while you're here with the Second Lady?
Oh, I think it's disgraceful, but of course the Second Lady can speak for herself, and I'm very lucky to have a wonderful wife, and I know, or at least I hope that my wife feels the same about me, but we are very lucky to have this journey, or I should say I'm very lucky to go on this journey with a very loving wife.
I think the little Manchurian candidate, JD Vance, wants to be president more than anything else.
Yeah.
I always wonder what's going on in the mind of his wife. Like,
Agreed.
Are you okay? Please blink 4 times.
Yes.
We'll come over here. We'll save you.
Okay, so here's the thing that nobody's talking about, but everybody's whispering about right now. And honestly, it's kind of wild how fast this whole situation escalated. We're watching what might be the most high-profile political marriage in America absolutely crumble in real time. And I'm talking about Vice President JD Vance and his wife Usha. And look, I know we've all seen political marriages fall apart before, right? Like, this isn't exactly new territory for Washington, but there's something different about this one, something that feels way more intense and honestly way more uncomfortable to watch unfold. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. So here's what's been happening, and buckle up because this gets messy really fast. Over the past few weeks, basically since mid-October, there's been this growing wave of reports and rumors suggesting that Usha Vance has been privately discussing separating from her husband. And we're not just talking about random gossip blogs here, okay? Like, major outlets have been covering this, body language experts are weighing in, political commentators are dissecting every photo op, and the whole thing has turned into this massive story that the White House absolutely cannot seem to contain, no matter how hard they try. And here's where it gets really interesting, because this isn't just about a marriage falling apart under the pressure of political life, which honestly would be sad enough on its own. No, this whole situation apparently kicked off because of what people are calling revelations about Usha's secret past. Now I'm going to be real with you. The details here are super murky, and nobody's actually confirmed what this past supposedly involves. But from what we're piecing together from various reports and social media leaks, there's apparently some kind of past relationship and a sealed legal filing from when Usha was in law school at Yale that somehow resurfaced. Political bloggers have been going absolutely wild with this, connecting it to some Yale Law Review debate from back in the day, and the whole thing has turned into this feeding frenzy of speculation and rumor. But here's what makes this story so fascinating to me, and why I think it matters way beyond just celebrity gossip or political drama. What we're seeing right now is this perfect storm where traditional expectations of privacy, the demands of political life, and our absolutely insane modern media environment are all colliding in the most brutal way possible. And Usha Vance, who by all accounts was a pretty private person before her husband became vice president, is now at the absolute center of this maelstrom, whether she wants to be there or not. And the signs that something's seriously wrong have been building for months, apparently. Like, if you go back and look at the timeline, people have been noticing things were off since at least April of this year. Usha started missing major events. She stopped appearing in photos with her husband. And when she did show up for public appearances, body language experts have been pointing out that she looked visibly uncomfortable and that the couple seemed to be actively avoiding each other. And I know body language analysis can sometimes be a bit questionable, right? Like, people can read too much into stuff. But when you've got multiple experts all saying the same thing, And when it lines up with Usher's increasing absence from the public eye, it starts to paint a pretty clear picture. And then things really exploded in the last couple weeks. Usher refused to attend some Vatican ceremony with JD, which is a huge deal because that's exactly the kind of high-profile event that a vice president's spouse is expected to show up for. Then it came out that during their family vacation to the UK Cotswolds back in August, Usher apparently wasn't even there for most of it. Like, people literally started calling it a bachelor trip for the vice president, which is just wild when you think about what that implies about the state of their marriage. Now, the White House is obviously in full damage control mode here. JD's communications team has been dismissing all the divorce talk as gossip peddled by desperate partisans, which honestly is probably what they have to say regardless of whether it's true or not. But here's the problem with that response, and this is what makes this story so hard for them to kill. Usha herself has been completely silent. She's not denying anything. She's not making statements. She's not showing up at events to prove everything's fine. Her absence is becoming the story itself, and in Washington, silence like that usually means something. And what really cranked this whole thing up to 11 was when MSNBC's Jen Psaki made this joke during a segment where she urged Usha to blink 4 times if you need help. Now look, I get that it was supposed to be funny, but that comment sparked this absolutely massive backlash, and the White House ended up having to release an official statement calling it moronic and disrespectful, which tells you just how sensitive they are about this whole situation right now. Alright, so let's dig into why this matters so much beyond just the personal drama, because there's actually a ton of important stuff happening beneath the surface here. And I want to start with something that I think is getting lost in all the speculation about affairs and divorce and secret past, which is the bigger question of what this tells us about power and gender and expectations in modern American politics. First off, we need to talk about who Usha Vance actually is, because I think that context is super important for understanding why this story has blown up the way it has. Usha isn't just some political spouse who married into power and has been riding her husband's coattails. She's a legitimate powerhouse in her own right. She clerked for Chief Justice John Roberts. She was a Supreme Court litigator. She's got this incredibly impressive legal career. And now she's being reduced to tabloid fodder about her marriage potentially falling apart and mysterious sealed documents from her past. Like, that's got to be incredibly frustrating and dehumanizing, right? And here's where it gets really complicated, because Usha represents this intersection of identities that makes her story resonate in all these different ways. She's a woman of South Asian descent who married a white guy who's now vice president in a Trump administration that hasn't exactly been known for its inclusivity. She's a highly educated professional woman who's expected to play this traditional supportive spouse role. She's someone who clearly valued her privacy, who's now having every aspect of her personal life dissected in public. And all of those tensions are bubbling to the surface right now in this moment. The South Asian media coverage of this has been particularly interesting, and I think it highlights something important about how this story is being received in different communities. Outlets like the Times of India and Hindustan Times have been covering this heavily, and they've been framing it specifically as Usha symbolizing the tension between traditional privacy and America's hyper-political celebrity culture. And that's such an important framing because it recognizes that there are cultural dimensions to how we think about public versus private life, about family obligations, about what it means to stand by your spouse in difficult circumstances. Now let's talk about these so-called revelations about Usha's past, because this is where things get really murky and honestly kind of disturbing in terms of how information spreads in our current media environment. So from what we can piece together, there's allegedly some sealed affidavit from when Usha was clerking for Chief Justice Roberts, and this document supposedly has something to do with what right-wing bloggers are calling a Yale-era mentoring controversy. But here's the thing, and this is crucial, no major media outlet has actually verified what's in this file. Nobody's seen it. We don't know if it even exists in the form that's being described. What we have instead is this game of telephone where bloggers reference the document, other outlets report on the blogger's claims, social media amplifies everything, and suddenly it becomes accepted as fact, even though there's no actual evidence. And this is such a perfect example of how our information ecosystem is completely broken right now. We've created this environment where rumors and speculation can take on a life of their own and become the story, even when there's no there. And think about what that means for Usha personally. If these documents don't exist or don't contain what people claim they contain, she's being smeared based on complete fabrication. But she's in this impossible position where if she responds and denies it, she's giving oxygen to the rumors. If she stays silent, people interpret that as confirmation. There's literally no way for her to win in this situation, which is exactly how character assassination works in the modern age. The body language analysis stuff that's been circulating is another fascinating element of this story. Multiple experts have been brought on various news shows to analyze footage of JD and Usha at public events, and they're all pointing out the same patterns. The couple standing far apart, avoiding eye contact, Usha looking uncomfortable, both of them appearing to actively avoid physical contact. And again, you can question whether body language analysis is reliable, but when you've got consistent observations from multiple professionals and it aligns with Usha's increasing absence from public life, it does start to paint a picture. The Vatican ceremony refusal was particularly significant because of what it represents symbolically. Like, this wasn't just any event, it was a major diplomatic and religious occasion where the vice president's spouse would absolutely be expected to attend. The fact that Usha didn't show up speaks volumes, and it gave credence to all the rumors about the marriage being in serious trouble. And then when the details about the UK vacation came out, that basically sealed the narrative for a lot of people. How do you explain your wife not being present for a family vacation to the point where people start calling it a bachelor trip? Now let's talk about the political dimensions of this, because that's where things get really interesting in terms of what this means for the Trump-Vance administration. The White House is clearly terrified of this story, and you can see that in how aggressively they've responded to it. That statement calling Jen Psaki's comments moronic and disrespectful was unusually harsh even for this administration. They know that the narrative of the vice president's marriage falling apart undermines their whole family values brand at a time when they're already dealing with massive political problems. And the polling data is apparently showing that this is having a real impact, particularly with suburban women voters. According to Reuters, pollsters are seeing JD Vance's approval ratings take a hit, specifically among that demographic, which was already a problem area for the Trump-Vance ticket. Suburban women were supposed to be part of their recovery strategy heading into the 2026 midterms, and now this personal drama is making that even harder, because whether fair or not, voters do make judgments about politicians based on their personal lives, and a vice president whose marriage is publicly imploding doesn't exactly inspire confidence. The Jen Psaki incident deserves its own analysis because it crystallized so much of what's dysfunctional about our political discourse right now. On one hand, Psaki was making what she probably thought was a lighthearted joke, the kind of quippy comment that plays well in the MSNBC universe. But on the other hand, she was essentially making light of what could be a genuinely difficult and painful situation for Usha Vance as an individual human being. And the fact that it sparked such massive backlash shows how raw the nerves are around this whole situation. What's particularly interesting to me is how the framing of Usha's silence has evolved. Initially, it was being portrayed as maybe just her being private or trying to stay out of the political fray. But as time has gone on and she's continued to be absent from more and more events, the narrative has shifted to interpreting that silence as a statement in itself. Her absence has become a form of protest, whether she intends it that way or not. And that puts even more pressure on the White House because every event where Usha doesn't show up becomes another news cycle about the state of the marriage. And we also need to talk about what this reveals about the toll that political life takes on families, because that's a real issue that goes way beyond partisan politics. We ask people who enter public service to basically surrender their privacy and subject themselves and their families to absolutely brutal scrutiny. And while that might be somewhat justified for the politicians themselves who choose to enter that arena, it's much more complicated when it comes to their spouses and children who didn't necessarily sign up for that level of exposure. Usha Vance had her own successful career before her husband became vice president. She was a respected lawyer with her own professional identity, and now she's been reduced to speculation about her marriage and mysterious documents from her past and whether she blinked the right number of times during a photo op. Like, that's a massive loss of autonomy and dignity, and it's worth asking whether we as a society are okay with that being the price of political power. So where does all this leave us, and what are the actual implications of this unfolding situation? Because I think there are several different layers we need to unpack here, and they all matter in different ways depending on what angle you're looking at this from. Let's start with the most immediate political consequences, because those are already playing out in real time. The Trump-Vance administration is dealing with an absolute avalanche of scandals and controversies right now. You've got the Supreme Court rebuking Trump's executive power. You've got cascading DOJ scandals. You've got all sorts of policy battles and legal challenges. And now on top of all that, you've got this very personal drama about the vice president's marriage potentially falling apart. And that matters because it's a distraction that the White House absolutely cannot afford right now. Political capital is a finite resource, and every news cycle that gets eaten up by speculation about JD and Usha's marriage is a news cycle where the administration isn't advancing its agenda or controlling the narrative on issues it cares about. And the fact that this story has legs, that it keeps generating new headlines and new angles, means it's not going away anytime soon. Even if the White House wanted to just ignore it and wait for it to blow over, the media environment won't let them do that. The impact on JD Vance's political future is potentially huge here. Like, we're not just talking about his current approval ratings taking a hit. We're talking about whether this fundamentally damages his viability as a national political figure going forward. If his marriage does fall apart publicly, if there's an actual divorce, that becomes part of his permanent political narrative. And in a party that still puts a lot of emphasis on traditional family values, that could be a real liability. But here's where it gets complicated. Because the Republican base might actually give him a pass on this, we've seen over and over again that voters are willing to overlook personal scandals if they like a politician's policy positions or feel like that politician is fighting for them. Donald Trump himself has been divorced multiple times and has faced endless scandals about his personal life, and it clearly hasn't stopped him from maintaining strong support among his base. So it's possible that JD Vance could weather this too, especially if he can frame it as the media unfairly attacking his family. The gender dynamics at play here are absolutely fascinating and deserve way more attention than they're getting. There's this assumption baked into all the coverage that Usha is the one who's wrong for potentially wanting to leave, or that she owes it to her husband to stand by him no matter what. But why? Like, if the marriage isn't working, if political life is making her miserable, why shouldn't she be able to walk away? Why do we still have these expectations that political spouses, especially wives, need to perform this role of the supportive partner, even when doing so comes at tremendous personal cost? And the fact that Usha is being criticized for her absence from events, for not playing the traditional political wife role enthusiastically enough, really reveals how limited our imagination still is when it comes to what women in politics are allowed to do and be. She's not the one who ran for office. She's not the one who chose this life, and yet she's being judged and scrutinized as if she has some obligation to perform a role she never asked for. The secret past element of this story is particularly troubling because of how it weaponizes a woman's history against her. Even if the sealed documents exist, and even if they contain something that could be considered controversial, we're talking about events from Usha's early career, from her time in law school and clerking. The idea that anything from that period should be used to define her now, or to justify scrutiny of her marriage, is pretty messed up when you think about it. It's this classic pattern where women's pasts are excavated and examined in ways that men's rarely are. And let's be real about what's likely happening behind the scenes with these alleged documents. In all probability, there's either nothing there, or there's something that's being wildly misrepresented and taken out of context. But by the time the truth comes out, if it ever does, the damage will already be done. Usha's reputation will have been impacted, her privacy will have been invaded, and she'll be forever associated with this vague cloud of scandal, even if there was never any substance to it. The cultural conversation that this has sparked, especially within South Asian communities, is really important and speaks to larger issues about representation and belonging. Usha Vance is one of the most prominent South Asian women in American politics, and the fact that she's now at the center of this scandal and potentially stepping back from public life sends a complicated message. On one hand, it might resonate with people who understand the tension between cultural expectations of privacy and the demands of American political celebrity. On the other hand, it might reinforce stereotypes or make other South Asian Americans feel less represented in high-profile political spaces. The media's role in all of this cannot be overstated. Outlets are covering this story because it generates clicks and views, because people are interested in the personal drama of political figures. But there's a real question about whether the level of coverage is justified and whether it's serving any legitimate public interest. Yes, the vice president's personal life and judgment are relevant to some degree, but do we really need body language experts analyzing every photo? Do we really need endless speculation about sealed documents that nobody's actually seen? At what point does journalism become something closer to voyeurism or harassment? And the Jen Psaki thing really crystallizes this tension. She's a professional political commentator who was making what she thought was a clever, pointed joke. But jokes like that contribute to this environment where Usha Vance can't escape the scrutiny, even from people who are ostensibly on the opposite political team. It becomes this bipartisan feeding frenzy where everyone gets to weigh in and everyone gets to speculate, and the actual human being at the center of it all becomes almost beside the point. Looking ahead, I think there are a few possible scenarios for how this plays out. Scenario 1 is that Usha continues to remain largely absent from public life, but doesn't formally separate or divorce, and the whole thing just becomes this accepted background fact about the Vance marriage that people eventually stop talking about as much. Scenario 2 is that there's an actual separation or divorce, which would be a massive political story and would dominate coverage for weeks or months. Scenario 3 is that Usha suddenly reappears at public events and there's some kind of effort to present a united front, though at this point, that would probably raise as many questions as it would answer. What's clear is that this situation has already changed the narrative around JD Vance's vice presidency in a fundamental way. Even if the marriage survives, even if the rumors turn out to be overblown, he's now the vice president whose marriage was publicly falling apart during his first year in office. That's part of his story now, permanently. And for Usha, the damage to her privacy and reputation has already been done. Even if she never wanted to be a public figure in this way, she is one now, and that can't be undone. The broader implications for political families are worth considering too. Stories like this might make people think twice before getting involved in politics, or before marrying someone with political ambitions. If you know that choosing that path means potentially having your entire personal life excavated and scrutinized, that your old relationships and sealed legal documents might be dug up and misrepresented, that your body language at public events will be analyzed by experts on cable news, 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 will be analyzed. That's a pretty strong disincentive. And that's bad for democracy if it means we're losing good people who might otherwise serve because they're not willing to subject themselves and their families to that level of exposure. At the end of the day, what we're watching is a very public unraveling of something that should probably be private. Whether the marriage is actually ending or not, whether the rumors have substance or not, the fact remains that Usha Vance is a real person going through something difficult under absolutely brutal scrutiny. And while JD Vance is a public figure who signed up for that scrutiny to some extent, it's less clear that his wife did. The question we should all be asking ourselves is whether this kind of coverage serves any legitimate purpose, or whether we've just become a society that consumes other people's pain as entertainment. And if the marriage is ending, if Usha does decide to walk away from all this, I honestly wouldn't blame her. Political life is brutal and unforgiving, and nobody should have to sacrifice their own well-being and dignity to play a role in someone else's career. But the fact that her choice to potentially leave is itself becoming a political story, that even her exit can't be private, shows just how trapped she really is in this situation. No matter what she does, it'll be news. No matter what choice she makes, it'll be analyzed and judged. And that's the real scandal here. Honestly, not whatever might be in some sealed document from 20 years ago, but the fact that we've created a system where people can't escape the spotlight even when it's destroying them.